Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a skeptic. Welcome to whatever this is that I'm doing. Now, we're going to be looking at Stefan Molyneux and how fucking dumb he is. Well, the man's not actually dumb, but I think he's very disingenuous. I really, truly believe that this is a snake in the grass. And yet, people flock to this guy as he's a great mind of our time. Has important things to say and isn't just bullshitting his way through this. Now, yes, Stefan is very knowledgeable in terminology when it comes to philosophy, but how he applies that terminology seems to be very disingenuous. Now, I'm going to explain this a little bit more in detail, but at first he needs to start reading this article, and then afterwards I will respond. So, get through him reading this, and then I'll show up on the other side of it.
All right. This is from Amir Srinivasan. I'm sorry if I butchered your name, but you're butchering my philosophy, so that's fair enough. Questions for Free Market Moralists. This is published October 20th, 2013 on the New York Times blog. She starts, in 1971, John Rawls published A Theory of Justice, the most significant articulation and defense of political liberalism in the 20th century. Rawls proposed that the structure of a just society was the one that a group of rational actors would come up with if they were operating behind a veil of ignorance. That is, provided they had no prior knowledge of what their gender, age, wealth, talents, ethnicity, and education would be in the imagined society. Since no one would know in advance where in society they would end up, rational agents would select a society in which everyone was guaranteed basic rights, including equality of opportunity. Since genuine, rather than on paper, equality of opportunity requires substantial access to resources, shelter, medical care, education, Rawls' rational actors would also make their society a redistributive one, ensuring a decent standard of life for everyone. In 1974, Robert Nozick countered with Anarchy, State, and Utopia. He argued that a just society was simply one that results from an unfettered free market, and that the only legitimate function of the state was to ensure the workings of the free market by enforcing contracts and protecting citizens against violence, theft, and fraud. So there's more to it. I just wanted to mention this. I've got a whole podcast on this, which you can check out at freedomainradio.com on Rawls' Theory of Justice. I studied it many years ago. Even in undergraduate, we studied it in the philosophy of law. It is a nonsense argument. The only way that you can justify these kinds of things is if you think that money is somehow different from all other human ownership.
There's a huge distinction between stealing money and raping someone. That's why in the criminal system there is a much heavier penalty for raping someone than robbing someone. And if that's not true, then it should be. So there is big distinctions between money and the right to your own body. And if you can't see that distinction, then you're not a very moral person. If you want to say that going and stealing $1,000 from someone is the same as breaking into their house and raping them, then you're obviously not working on the same playing field as I am. We're not in the same fucking ball game, because obviously I can see a distinction between someone's money, stealing $20 from them, okay, and taking advantage of their bodies.
Right? So a woman owns her vagina, and therefore nobody may use that vagina without her permission. Otherwise, it's rape. I own my kidneys, therefore, even if you need one, you cannot come and take one of my kidneys without my permission. Now, vaginas and kidneys and children and so on, these can't be easily redistributed because we have a moral repugnance to them. But people put money into a separate category. I earn money. It is mine to choose to do with as I see fit. I choose to donate some to charity. I choose to keep some. I choose to invest some. I choose to give some to my daughter in terms of food and shelter and so on.
All right, so right now he's trying to equate the redistribution of wealth the same as the redistribution of someone else's body. As to say, because someone has an abundance of wealth, you take it from them and redistribute it to people who need it more than them, is not the same as someone having a vagina and then redistributing that vagina amongst people who aren't getting laid. Can you not see how that is a huge fucking difference? You cannot be separate from your body. The rights to your body are always with you. Okay, you can say that I want to hand over sex to someone. I want to have sex with someone, right? There is distinction between doing that and giving money over to someone. You're not a part of that money anymore. What they do with that money isn't up to you. But what goes on with your body is at every moment up to you, even if you decided you wanted to have sex. But you can't give money to someone and then ask for it back or then determine what they do with it. You can absolutely do that with your own body. Can you not see the difference between money, the right to your money, and the right to your own body? And you also can't have an abundance of your own body. You can't have an abundance of dick or vagina. And, and a bunch of other people don't have dicks or vaginas, so we're going to redistribute dicks and vaginas to everyone who doesn't have them or wants to have sex with them. It's not the same fucking thing, Stefan. I know you're going to try to qualify the two as the same thing, so then you can go into your bullshit spiel about how it's wrong.
And when we separate money from all other forms of property, then we feel much more comfortable redistributing it. But somebody who takes my money against my will has simply made me a retroactive slave for a certain period of time. If it takes me a week to earn $1,000, somebody takes $1,000 from me by force after the fact, then they have simply made me a slave after the fact for 1 week.
Does Stefan understand what slavery is? Slavery is the complete ownership of a person. Now, if you go steal from a person, steal their money, yes, they're going to have to work to make that money up, but at no point do you now own that person. A slave owner can dictate everything that its slave does. Just because you go rob money from someone and then they have to make it up does not mean you own that person and then decide from there on out what they do or even how they choose to make up the money. Just because you steal from someone, which you shouldn't, does not mean you're putting that person into fucking slavery. And again, this is all because he wants to link property rights to self-ownership. He wants to say that you own your body just as much as you own your property. So then he can say if the government tries to come and take your land so they can build a road through it, well, that's the same as the government coming into your house and raping you. Can you see the ties that he's trying to make so he can set up his argument? The ties are tenuous and they could be broken in any moment with a simple reflection into how they hold up. They do not hold up very well. The ties between self-ownership and property rights. You do not own your property the same way you own your body.
So let me sort of explain why it's important that we don't have arbitrary distinctions in terms of property for money as opposed to just about everything else. We don't say that everyone deserves housing, therefore you have to put up 2 families in your house in addition to your own. I mean, they did that after the Russian Revolution in 1917, but houses are sort of different from money, because you can take people's money and it is much less repugnant to us morally than if we simply force people to go live in their house, or you say to this woman, listen, there are lots of ugly and unpleasant guys who want to have sex, and it's selfish of you to keep that vagina all to yourself, so I'm afraid we're going to have to redistribute it on your behalf. This would be morally repugnant to us in the same way that we would say to a couple, listen, there are some couples who can't have children but really want them. You have 6 children, they have none. We need to take 2 of your children and give it to the other couple because it's not fair that you just happen to be fertile and they happen to not be fertile. So this is stuff that we would find repugnant. We're fine with it with money for a variety of reasons. The money is the root of all evil, and we're told to demonize money, and so on. But we put this in a separate category. So let's take this the Rawlsian argument for operating from behind the veil of ignorance. What kind of society would we want? And so her argument is, or Rawls's argument that she's repeating here, is we'd want a welfare state in case we were really broke and poor. We'd want public education in case we didn't have access to education. But we'd want some aspects of the free market in case we were really ambitious and wanted to go, start some big company or something.
Okay, let me explain the veil of ignorance argument real quick. It's rational actors, okay, are most rational actors we could find behind a veil of ignorance, meaning they don't know their place in society, they don't know their sex, they don't know anything that could make them biased in their decisions when setting up a society. Now, this is not something that we can actually do. This is more of a thought experiment into what the most fair or just society would be. But the veil of ignorance is meant to take the bias out of the building of a society. Because if you know you're already rich, then you're not going to build a society to where it gives you the opportunity to become rich if you are already rich. That's what the veil of ignorance is supposed to do. And yes, you would want a welfare state, or at least some welfare, some way of falling back onto something if your ventures in business did not work out. In a society, you would want those things to ensure that even if you fucked up, or even if you weren't smart, or even if you didn't have the opportunities to become wealthy, that you were still going to have some sort of a life worth living, some sort of a decent existence, right? And that's why these things are set up in place to where not everyone is going to become wealthy. Not everyone can be wealthy. So that's why we do have systems in place for the people who aren't as fortunate, who aren't as smart, who don't have the same opportunities as you do to still live a life worth living. That's what the veil of ignorance is supposed to do. It is supposed to take out the bias in us and allow for everyone, in a utilitarian sense, to live a life regardless of their stance in life. And that's what we should strive for. That seems to be a more moral stance than just the non-aggression principle played out in theory to a conclusion of anarcho-capitalism, which brings a plethora of different issues with it that he runs away from whenever he gets the chance. But anyways, back into it.
Now, it's only because we put money in a separate moral category that we're able to countenance these kinds of things. So if I replace money with something else, like genitals, then we would say, what kind of society would we want in the distribution of sex? Well, you wouldn't want sex to always be coercive. Like, you wouldn't want rape to be the standard. Because if you were some super sexy man, then if you were Brad Pitt or whatever, then you could just go and have sex. No problem. Just go out and, you'd be able to have lots of women probably want to sleep with you and so on. So you wouldn't want sex to be coercive because you could earn much more sex just simply by being attractive. Now, if you were really unattractive or unappealing, if you didn't like washing, if you were unpleasant or whatever, really bad breath or whatever, then you would still want to have access to sex. So you'd want a minimum of sex to be enforced by the state for everyone.
Wow, Stefan, did you not pay attention to the article that you just fucking read? Here, I'll read it again for you and show how you're being a fucking ignoramus by even making these comments as if they're making a point. Rawls proposed that the structure of a just society was the one that a group of rational actors would come up with if they were operating behind a veil of ignorance. Behind a veil of ignorance. That is, provided they had no prior knowledge to what their gender, age, wealth, talents, ethnicity, and education would be in the imagined society. Hence the name Veil of Ignorance. Now, he completely throws this aside and goes into attacking what a man would do in building a just society behind this veil of ignorance. Completely not engaging with the actual argument being set in front of him. Now, let me tell you, this is what he always fucking does. He's gonna go in and he's gonna try to explain things in some fucking weird way, and he's gonna pack his arguments with a bunch of minutia just to fucking hide the fact that he never really made a point or actually engaged with the argument.
In other words, a woman would be delivered to you, right? So on average, I think people have sex, if you're married a couple of times a week kind of thing. If you're single, it's a little less. Let's just say it's twice a week. So you'd want a minimum of twice a week sex. You'd want the government to deliver women to you at gunpoint for sex twice a week, but you wouldn't want to be only limited to sex twice a week. You would then want to be able to go out and get more sex at a bar or whatever, but at a minimum, you would want twice a week to have sex, and the government to enforce that on your behalf, just in case you were ugly or unappealing or whatever.
All right, so even though he is not taking the veil of ignorance as is, even though he's not dealing with the actual argument, I can still refute his argument with his own logic. Okay, even if it was a man in a society building it and he was ugly and wanted to ensure himself that he had sex in this society, where would these women be coming from? Would each woman be obliged to give up sex and be shipped across the country to all these men? I mean, would it be his own daughter? Would it be his own mother or sister or grandma? Do you think that if it was, then he would still want to do it in that way? He would still want sex to be redistributed through society if his family actually had to participate in it and they were some of the women being shipped across the country? I don't think so. I don't think that most men out there, 99.9% of men, would choose to have sex delivered to their house by women if their mom also had to be shipped out to be fucking raped by someone. So even when he tries to change the argument and weasel this bullshit in, he still fails.
Now, this is a morally repulsive argument. Of course it is, right? I mean, because there's no amount of coerced sex that is moral. No matter how much people need it, no matter how people want it or whatever. Well, there you go. So it's only by creating this artificial division where money is not subject to the moral law that we can countenance this stuff.
So let me tell you that in that whole entire thing where he tries to make this link between money and self-ownership, it still fails. And the veil of ignorance, which is a very prominent moral theory in philosophical textbooks and is pretty easy to follow and understand, he can't even deal with that simplistic moral argument because it completely destroys the non-aggression principle and anarcho-capitalism and how people would actually want their societies built. This guy is a class A fucking joke. So that's really all I got for you. I just wanted to show how Stefan completely just dodges points and then acts at the end of it like he's made a point. But as you can clearly see, he doesn't deal with the argument set forth in front of him, like the veil of ignorance. He calls the veil of ignorance stupid and goes on to show how it's stupid by not addressing it. Now, I've watched a lot of Stefan Molyneux now, and basically whenever he does these videos in response to other people saying that anarcho-capitalism or the non-aggression principle is stupid, which it is, this is what he does. He doesn't actually address the points, and in place of addressing points, he goes on these long fucking spiels and crowds his arguments with such fucking minutia that in order to actually get to a point, you have to just dig through a bunch of bullshit to try to find a point that he's made, but then you actually come to find out, after you've dug through all this shit, no point was actually made. So I think I'm going to do a lot more videos about Stefan because I believe he's actually a dangerous fellow. Have you seen this shit about him asking people to fucking disown their families if they don't agree with the non-aggression principle? That just goes to show you how far this guy will go and how right he thinks he is. Moral theories are something to play around with, to question. They're not absolutes at this time in fucking history. And that's a joke to say that the non-aggression principle is the end all. But that's the end of this video. Bye!